It's 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. First item will be roll call.
Brown,
Here.
Cox,
Here.
Chris,
Here.
Murphy,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Nail.
Here. Next item will be a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if it meets the board's approval, I'd like for us to add the board master calendar that we got with our packet. I've got a couple items I wanted to see if the board was.
We have for my motion for chairman to going to continue for the show mail with the virtual unit. And you have it, you're going to you.
So we have a motion to approve the agenda with that addition. Second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign. Everyone's had a chance to look over the previous meetings minutes. If there are no additions or corrections, they'll stand approved as presented. Announce visitors, Faith Bemis and Lloyd Pennington, and the staff members will announce when we do the awards. Years of service.
All right, we got some more people with some anniversaries. Some of them have been here since the very beginning, but I believe all these are 5-year awards, so that's the pin I have for them tonight. We'll start with Mr. Nate Smith. I saw him in the my glasses are there. Thank you for sticking around this long. Yes, sir. I appreciate the anniversary. Thank you. All right. And Mr. Charles Sheets. Charles. What it says on the certificate. This is Bob. And let's see. The Jordans. This is Paula Jordan. Paula started here. She was one of my EMT students back in 14, I believe. And now she's already a paramedic. So thank you, Paul, for everything you've done. Appreciate it. All right, thank you. And finally, who I've got here, I think we've got a couple missing. Faith has the names of those that are here. I'll read them off, but the last one I got here tonight is Sean Jordan. Sean, and nobody's running Class B, so. All right. Appreciate it. Oh, yeah, would you guys mind? Before you get the out?
Because you call me short.
I wouldn't want to do this one.
That'll be okay.
That's good. I'll stay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Some of them could be with us tonight. One of them is Flo Hammer. He's just chief. We have to see that for just a moment. He's been here. Haley Green is not around at the moment. Like I said, I think they're either out on call or they're out doing errands. And then Matt Anderson. We've got 2 Matt Andersons. So we call this one Anderson. We got MJ and Matt. So. And then Brittany, those are all 5-year anniversaries. So several of those have been here since the very beginning. Thank you.
Thanks. There was no further comment, so we'll move on to the officer's report, chief's report.
You got it. Okay. What I did was it's been a little crazy in my world lately here, so I pulled our call volumes from last year. Since we're at the year's end, I could kind of dissect everything and see where we're at, where we stood. In the scheme of things, it's not coming up. Just thinking. Okay. Everybody should have one of these packets. I believe we've given one to the Democrat as well. what you have before you, I'm gonna put up on the board just because it's a little bit easier to see. But every year I like to go through here and, like I said, dissect, see where we're running our calls. I have some breakdowns that will further, that will provide some further information that are in our strategic planning packet. Some of that stuff, probably the most significant, it'll include a lot of the calls that we're not talking about here tonight, which is our non-transports and some of our key performance indicators like return of circulation for cardiac arrest, and some more detailed information, including our demographics, what kind of age and sex that our patients are by and large, what we've been doing. So tonight, I've got 2021's call volume info as a matter for my report. As far as anything else, I generally give you guys a full report. Not much to say right now, other than we're just wrapping up a lot of year-end stuff, getting things moving. There was a PALS class, pediatric advanced life support, over here today, so we're already jumped right back into our education regimen. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. This is my standard report, so you can see December's up there. We ended up topping 9,000 calls for both services. We ended with, as you can see, 1227 with Windsor and 7926 for Pettis County. So add them up and we crested 9,000 easily this year. And that's our total numbers for the year. Like I said, I break those down a little bit. Go ahead and hit the next slide. For the rest of these, I wanted to put this up because 2017 is when I took over as chief, interim chief initially. And that's when I started collecting good data that year. So I took us back 4 years, 2017 through 2021, and you can kind of see where we've been. If you take those greens and add them together, that's the total call volume for the district. So 70, 72, and 1114 is where we get the 81, 86 over there on the left for 2017, and so on and so forth. That's our standard format that I use for our reports. I'll probably put a little more detail in that for next year. But if there's anything any gentlemen want in there that you don't see, or if it's too much information in some areas, I know that you don't look at a lot of numbers, but I think it's kind of interesting. I'm a little biased, but nonetheless, we ended up with that amount of calls for those years. I find it interesting that in 2012, when the district, before the district was formed, it was projected that we would run 3,700 calls a year. So we've nearly tripled that, but we've only doubled the staff. So we're doing well. Everybody's busy. I don't think they're too busy, but we're cooking. We're running more calls than we ever anticipated. And as long as we Sedalia keep growing, we'll keep up with it. So go ahead and hit the next slide. I went ahead and broke these down because our calls are a little bit different based on our call types, rather, based on provider impression. Transfers are a little bit different than our 911 calls, and that's simply because there's some things that Bothwell can keep, and there's some things that can't. As you can see, no surprises. In the past, those of you who've been here a while know that behavioral psychiatric calls really dominate a lot of our call types. There at the front, I went ahead and put the numbers up. These numbers don't necessarily correlate with the reports that you see every month because I've excluded all of the stuff we don't run, all of the invalids and cancel. Those are not in here. This is just transport. So this is all your inter-facility. This would go from Bothwell to any other hospital, not nursing homes, but actual hospitals, equal or higher level of care. So does that make sense? Okay. I've found it shocking the first couple of years I did this that we ran that many behavioral psychiatric type calls. Those include everything from anxiety to suicidal ideations. Pretty much everything is kind of lumped into that one category, and obviously I can break those down even further, but I think this gives you a general idea of where we're at. Other, that's basically just something that's not available in our coding. Generally, that just falls under sick for whatever reason. They don't fall under any of these other major headings. Cardiac, of course, is a big one. Stroke, we didn't take a lot out of Bothwell, and I think that probably speaks to their stroke program over there. They're more prone to keep the patient down than they would have been in the past. Sepsis has came up over the years, and that's mostly just due to some awareness. 2020, 2021 are not great data points. They're not too far off our normal, but there is just some wackiness because of bed availability at receiving facilities. We had a lot, our transfers just look a lot different than they normally do. So you can kind of see where that goes all the way down to, your minor stuff where we only took 5 fevers out, and all the way up to the big stuff, which is your stroke and core, weakness, central nervous system problems like altered mental status. And as you can imagine, a lot of these have a little crosstalk, like an altered mental status might be because of a stroke, it might be because of head injury from trauma, it might be because of drugs or some other reason. So this is about as simple as I could break it down. So you can go ahead and go to the next one. So I kind of like.
Question on there.
Sure, go back if you. Yeah.
Does that include like the transfer, the Windsor, like Royal Oaks and that?
Yes. Yeah, well, out of Royal Oaks, we don't consider those transfers as they're coming out of Royal Oaks, even though they're our hospital. We typically, if it's a medical thing, we're not gonna go to another site facility. They're generally being transferred out of there because of a medical emergency, so we consider that a 911 call. It's a good question. This is a little different chart than you might normally see. I know people get bored with bar and pie graphs, but I found this one kind of interesting because it breaks it down and visually you can see where we're really spending the bulk of our time and money, of course. Abdominal pain problems are very, very common in EMS, and that covers everything from here to here, just pretty much everything you can think of. Other illnesses, of course, is kind of a lumped in everything's kind of lumped in that category, but weakness calls, altered LOC, cardiac, and behavioral always really take the cake when it comes to the call types. And of course, that's where we spend a lot of our training hours is being proficient, doing the best thing, the most advanced things we can for those types of emergencies. And then we do a lot of our training over here on the smaller boxes, which correlate with the previous chart. These are just a visual representation of the chart that was on slide before. As you can see, we might not do that little gray box in the very bottom right is what we did last month. That's geriatric, it's GE, it's geriatric emergencies, geriatric related stuff. So you can kind of, actually it's general related, so I apologize. I don't have these broken down by age. I'm sorry. Go ahead with that. This is our 911 breakdown. Most of these categories are the same as what we've seen before. And this dissects all of, again, this is just transport. So this does not include, even if there was a complaint, it doesn't include any kind of treatment release or patient refusal of care, which, as you know, as most of those refusals occur on car wrecks and things like that, where we'll have third-party callers. Nobody's actually hurt. We'll just go on it, assess, and release the patient. So trauma takes the cake there with behavioral and abdominal following very close second and third. Respiratory and cardiac, of course, are big ones, and as well as altered LOC, and then it kind of decreases from there throughout the selection of call types. So, any questions so far on this? Hopefully, this is helpful and give you kind of an idea of where we spend all of our time on scene. This is when we're out doing stuff. This is the meat and potatoes that are working. So go ahead and go to the next one, and I broke it down just the same way. Yep.
So COVID-19, those are just the positive COVID-19s that we knew were COVID that way.
I have a little bit more information on our strategic planning packet on COVID-19, but these are the ones that actually listed COVID-19 as the provider impression. So they were being transferred out for whatever reason, being caused predominantly by COVID-19. These would be vent patients, patients going to equal facilities generally, it was just a bed availability type issue. So we did see a lot of COVID patients last year.
In this data here that we're looking at in a different format, where would we find falls? I know falls are pretty common.
Falls is going to be that very top left. That's under traumatic injury.
Gotcha.
Very good. Yeah. But yes, you're correct. Falls takes up the lion's share of traumatic injuries. We break them down, injuries to the hand, the neck, the arm, the back. We break them down to body area. But there'd be 40 million squares up there if I gave you that information. So I can always get into the minutia anytime anybody wants. This just, like I said, it lumps all traumatic injuries, including burns, anywhere on your body that your injury is going to be lumped into that category. Unless you maybe had a syncopal episode or something that caused that fall, where that's what we're going to be focusing on, like a heart attack and then fall down and hit your head, or whatever the case is. That would be under a heart attack. That's a long-winded answer for a short question.
Thank you.
Here, what else do I got up there? That may be the last. Is there any other slides on that? Oh, okay, this one, simply, I don't know, I won't waste your time going through this. This just combines them all, so you can see really they do kind of map out pretty regularly, but there are some differences in what we transfer hospital to hospital and 911. So not a whole lot of difference, but Buffalo does a good job of handling most of that lower number stuff, where it typically doesn't get transferred out or gets fixed, treated, and released, etc. So, and then that's just another graphic representation that kind of looks like the second one. Like I said, the transfers looks significantly different just based on availability. And we don't have a psychiatric hospital incidentally, so that's one of the reasons. Behavioral health takes up a lot of our interfacility call off as well. Yes.
When you say transfer, I think about time. I think that, the patient gets, gets loaded in the ambulance that leaves our city and our county.
Yep.
So how long do you have an average track time of a transfer? Is it 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours?
It's 2 to 3 hours.
2 to 3
2.5 is probably average, just depending on where they're going. Most of the time, we're either going to this end of Kansas City or Columbia, which both are just a little north of an hour away. We'll spend 20 to 30 minutes loading that patient. We'll spend that transport time, which is an hour and 15, hour and 20. Then we'll probably spend another 20 or 30, and then the hour and 15 back. So generally, it's not unheard of to waste 3.5 hours plus on call, but they get them done pretty quick, get back in service. When we come back, assuming they're not completely depleted of supplies or oxygen or something, they do go back in service and available for call as soon as they hit the county line, wherever they're coming to the county. Dispatch is tracking them this whole time. Yep. All right. Any other questions on that? Hopefully that information is interesting, if not helpful. So that's what I got for you guys. Okay. All right.
So I guess some traumatic injuries, same thing, you probably split between Kansas City and Columbia.
Most of the trauma goes to Columbia. Yeah, most of it. I won't say all of it for sure, but most of it goes to Columbia. We work off a lot of the similar protocols as they do. Kansas City is a little bit different than us. But yeah, I'd say probably 2/3 of it go to Columbia.
Any other questions for Eric?
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to CFO report.
Reports on page 4 with the bank balances as of January 6th versus December 22nd. You can see the interest we earned on those 2 CDs. There's interest earned on all 3, but you can see the interest earned on those 2. Those are the 2 new CDs. 4590. And then year over year, excuse me, we're up 704,000 in CDs, and then the total furnace is 576,000. Any questions on that? Page 5 is capital zone analysis. I've updated for the new budget year for 2022. So you'll see currently after these bills, we've got just under 5 months cash available. But if you take into consideration everything that is committed or encumbered, we're down to just under 3 months cash. Any questions on that?
The encumbered funds, that includes capital purchases.
Correct. Pages 6 through 8 are the check register. Any questions on any of those transactions? Credit card statement is the next 3 pages. If you have any questions.
On the credit card statement, there's Walmart 174, Perkins 163, was Express 35, is that food?
So Walmart is not, Walmart is supplies, like laundry detergent. My trash bags, like laundry detergent, coffee, creamer, sugar, just things that we provide at the station. The Perkins was Christmas dinner, as well as that Broadway carryout was Christmas dinner. So those are the only two that are food.
Is that a tradition?
Yeah.
We pay for a Christmas dinner for, is that the?
It's the on-duty crews get Christmas dinner when they're on Christmas. They work on Christmas, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Any other questions? Did I answer all of them? Did I hit all the ones you asked about them? Okay. Any other questions on any of those? Not, the bills are on page 12, and the details are pages 13 through 16. Any questions on any of that? Oh, pages 17 and 18, those are those two items that we sent out and you guys voted on by email. So I don't know what you guys want to do with those. Those are those two items, and you'll see those in the check register too. They were paid there on
Yeah, I have one other question on the S&P landscaping, page 15,
Mhm.
plow, snow and ice melt.
Mhm.
Didn't we have that contract which was over an inch?
No, I don't know. I have to look. The ice melt is really what they did those few times. Let me look it up real quick. The bill, but I think that was all ice melt. Because that was mostly ice.
Yeah, I didn't think we had over an inch.
Yeah, this was the New
Ice
Year's
is-
Day is
Yeah.
when that was, and that was for the ice.
Okay,
That's what let me make sure, but I'm pretty sure that was what that was. Yeah, it was all ice melt salt application. It was 3 times at station 2 and 3 times at headquarters. So yeah, they didn't flat, it was 2 ice melt.
Questions for Jamie? I'll take a motion to approve the outstanding bills. Second. Favor say aye. All opposed, same sign. Committee reports, strategic planning committee.
Don't have anything to report tonight, other than just plugging in a bunch of numbers.
Move on to unfinished business and election certification for districts 1 and 4.
we're supposed to vote to approve that. And make a motion to approve it.
Do you have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Employee handbook.
It doesn't matter to me.
You put all the notes in there, so I'll let you take it.
So this is just to update the handbook for the items that were effective January 1st. The vacation items, that was what was approved in the labor agreement. So that's just updating our vacation hours for our operational staff. And then pages 23 and 24 is updating the hourly rates that you guys approved effective January 1st. And that's the same with page 25.
The vacation days, that was negotiated not this year, but last year.
Correct. That was in the original agreement.
Motion to approve those changes in the handbook. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And we'll move on to new business, the master calendar.
On the Windsor contract in July, we don't, it doesn't seem like we know much about what's going on down there. I mean, because there isn't much going on down there. From what the chief said, you know, they don't talk a whole lot about much of anything. But I think it might be beneficial to have the minutes and the financial statements from each month. I'm assuming they have those. Could you share those with us so that we can kind of keep up? Since we are kind of responsible for that area, I hate for something to be going on. You know what happens when people get their hands in the till sometimes. Not that I don't trust the guys down there, but it's our responsibility to make sure that everything's good. And I just, since they had a problem in the past and we've had a problem in the past, I don't want to be on a board that gets in trouble again. So that's basically why I'd like to see those.
Well, haven't we been getting those?
I get them and generally hand them over to Jamie, but I don't think I don't know how much of that ends up in our reports.
I don't know, I don't put any.
There's not much on
Because it's
there,
not
like you
ours.
said, it basically shows what they took in in taxes versus what they paid out, which is generally
And I don't know that it has to be a
slim. It's one.
an agenda item, you know, you just include it in our forward for us. And then on the,
I'm sorry, that'll just be once a month. They do only once.
right, that's next week, right, yeah, in between our two.
Yeah.
And then on the September month, where we do the formal CFO and the administrator, we had talked about how we really don't have a very good system set up on that. And I think it would behoove us, before we get to September, to have on the agenda somewhere that we talk about how we're going to do that. We need to standardize it in a way so that I know how State Fair does it, because Sherilyn, my wife, works there. She's been there over 20 years and she's privy to what goes on in the board meetings. So I know that government agencies have people running them, and evaluating is always difficult, you know, in the school. And I didn't want to evaluate the teachers. I mean, that meant going sitting in the class and all this other stuff. We don't really see, you know, what's going on. So I think we should put that somewhere on our calendar where we can just discuss how we're going to do that before we get there. And then on the November, the budget discussion, we're kind of hard pressed when that comes up. And Jamie goes through it pretty quickly, but I didn't feel like we really had much time to discuss it in just our regular board meeting. Some places have a work session before it or another day before, where you sit down and you go through it line by line and everybody understands it. And we can then talk about kind of a line item, so everybody knows exactly what's in that. So I'd like to see us do that before November budget discussion, whether that's in a work session or special meeting or however But I think that would be valuable to me, and I'm thinking the rest of us might benefit from that. Instead of Jamie trying to cram it all in real quick, so we aren't here until midnight. So those are things I was thinking about, so thank you.
Is there any other thoughts on the master calendar?
With regard to the budget, the significant items that we, are probably the largest line items, we don't even get the data, Jamie, to consider until early December, late November. So having a discussion with regard to that, it would be great, but it's sometimes impossible to have the large items. Not because anybody's dragging their feet, just because of the insurances, and obviously if there's any negotiation of salaries, we have to deal with the union at year end. So I think Jamie's been very efficient and made herself available to all of us.
Well, as a group though, I was thinking, a discussion on the different things.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be delighted to spend some time with a work session if people want to go through and understand their budget more in depth and to understand how the money's spent. I'd be delighted to sit around if you're interested in doing such. But as far as understanding the full scope of the budget, anytime before November, which is almost an impossible thing to really have the next year's understanding. Is that maybe your feeling as well?
Yeah, I mean, we can go through have a work session anytime we get the budget done.
Right. And I'd be game for that. It just.
Well, if I may, in discussion with the strategic planning, the talk was that we might come to this board and say we would meet once a month instead of twice. And if we were to say to do that in our bylaws, because that would take a bylaws change. And we're the only district other than St. Charles that meets twice a month. Then you could have things like a budget work session where you would come, have the work session, and I'm 100% in favor of that. We would have the information for 2 weeks or whenever they would set up the meeting for us to formulate whatever questions. Jamie would present like she did before, and then you would pass it at the regular budget. A work session, you can have discussion. The hospital, the work sessions, there's not press there normally. It's a lot more open, those kind of things. So
Do you guys, I'm sorry, mind if I ask, do you guys do a subcommittee, like a budget committee?
we have a finance.
Rather than an actual work session, you just have people that come in?
For the budget itself is the whole board.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a finance committee. And then they vote on it first. You do the work session, and then the finance committee votes on it and takes it to the board. But I mean, they only have a 7-member board now too. That's back when they had 12.
But I mean, and you understand, I was also set on the hospital board of that, and it was a very efficient way. But you're obligating, in that type of scenario, board members to attend other meetings to get the scope of doing it. It's just a different way that committee sends its recommendation, and the board and the full board just basically stamps it. And it makes the board meetings very efficient, but board members still invest the same amount, if not more time. So. And that's great. If people want to dive in and understand, the full scope of this, I encourage it, absolutely encourage it.
Any other questions or thoughts?
just gonna give everybody an update, the GEMT that shows under January, that falls under November, not January. It's helpful, I'll try to make an updated calendar with the additions, if we do change that, and I'll email that out.
What is GEMT?
Ground emergency medical transport. It's our Medicaid cost report, basically.
It's fixed food paying you for uncompensated care. Thank you.
And flip over on the very back, if we, somebody wasn't gonna go there, or, there's a list of annual events that fall into our consideration as well. So.
Are there any other questions? If not, we'll try to address those changes and then maybe do an update. Are there any announcements?
One announcement that I had is, we're talking about trauma and skeletal trauma volume and all these things. The Bothwell is slated to have a trauma certification survey, assuming that COVID doesn't stop it. It was supposed to be August of 20, and they put it to the first week in February. So we would be certified as trauma level 3. So that would hope on some, cut down on some of our transport time. And that's
Are there any other announcements? If not, I'd take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.